Ladies and gentlemen, the Brit Pack is back. It is show number 46 of the MMA podcast that brings you fighting talk with a distinctly British flavour. My name is Simon Head. I'm a mixed martial arts journalist from the UK, as is my podcast inspiring partner, Chamatkar Sandhu. How are you, mate?
I'm very well, Si. It was a busy weekend in the world of mixed martial arts with two back-to-back UFC events, but it was also a busy weekend in the Sandhu household as me and my wife celebrated our 4-year wedding anniversary. So I had a celebratory kind of Thai massage, then we had some steak in the evening with some wine, and now we're just kind of rolling right into what is going to be yet another super packed busy week in our world.
Nice. Congratulations on the 4 years.
Thank you.
Yeah, do you know I've been married 11 years?
Wow, that's amazing.
My wife deserves a medal. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. But yeah, no, that's great stuff, mate. That's great stuff. And you are dead right. We've just had a busy week. We've got an even more busy week this week. Very quickly, just to let you know, on this week's show, we're going to look back at International Fight Week, pick out the key talking points, give our respective takes on the big stories that came out of Las Vegas last week. We will answer your questions in our regular Q&A section. We will look ahead to UFC Fight Night in Glasgow, Scotland, as the Octagon returns to the absolutely gorgeous SSE Hydro Arena up there in Glasgow for UFC Fight Night 113. And there's a small matter of the Floyd Mayweather-Conor McGregor press tour landing right here in England at Wembley Arena. When is it? Friday? It's Friday, isn't it? And I understand you're going to be there, Sandhu, so we will run through that as well before we shut up shop and bury ourselves in a week of juicy MMA goodness. But let's kick things off where it started, which was Las Vegas last Friday night, the Ultimate Fighter finale. We mentioned on last week's show that if you were in town and you had a few dollars spare to get yourself into the building, you would do yourself well to watch this card because there were some sneaky good fights on that card. And even if the rest of the card didn't really live up to the billing, the main event just paid for your ticket many, many times over. Justin Gaethje, former World Series champion, comes in and has a fight for forever contender, as I wrote down the other day, against Michael Johnson. Only went 2 rounds, but it was an absolute barn burner. Sandhu, have you seen a better fight in the last 2 or 3 years than Gaethje versus Johnson? That one's right up there for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly for this year, that it'll be hard to top that for Fight of the Year. If we see a better fight this year, then we're in for a treat. I mean, last couple of years, you can point to Carlos Condit, Robbie Lawler, Rory McDonald, Robbie Lawler. You can point to Cub Swanson, Doo Ho Choi. We've got a long history of MMA now. You can always, if we spent some time really thinking about it, I'm sure we can pick out some awesome fights. But I think perhaps in the context of, say, within 2 rounds, in the context of somebody making their UFC debut, in the context of an opponent who's never been finished by knockout or TKO before, that's when you start to really think about what an amazing feat this actually is and how awesome a fight it was. A great performance by Gaethje, a great win by Gaethje. And yeah, like I said, without a doubt, most probably going to be the Fight of the Year 2017.
Yeah, it was awesome. And I put this right alongside Cub Swanson versus Doo Ho Choi. It was one of those fights where you end up, even if you're sitting at home lounging around on the sofa, which I guess most people in the UK who watch MMA in the middle of the night are likely to be doing, just sort of chilling out, maybe having a cold beer, feet up on the table. I dare say a lot of people would have been standing up to watch that fight. I know I was. It was a fantastic contest. The big question now, Sandhu, is what happens with Justin Gaethje next. He's in the best weight class for great fights. There are so many options available. Assuming everybody's available when Gaethje's next fit, who would you like to see him in there with? Forget the rankings for a second. If you just want you want Gaethje in another barn burner, imagine the UFC talent relations team say, Sandhu, we want Gaethje to top that performance. We want him in an even better fight than the Johnson fight. Who's the best dance partner for the next fight, do you think?
Wow. I mean, honestly, Simon, take your pick. You got Khabib Nurmagomedov, undefeated. Imagine building up a fight between Khabib and Justin Gaethje. Somebody, though, has to go right there and then, right? Tony Ferguson, as tough as nails. That would be an amazing fight. And then, of course, Conor McGregor, the ultimate draw in our sport. So if you're going to just take, your dream scenario, you've got to put him in there with a top 4 or 5. Kevin Lee, coming off an impressive run as of late as well. I say anyone in that top 4 or 5 in the current lightweight rankings, and just take my money. Take my money all day long.
Yeah. The Khabib one for me is actually probably lower on the list from a promotional point of view. Yeah, absolutely. The two unbeaten guys, but stylistically, I don't know if it will deliver as exciting a fight as, say, Gaethje versus Edson Barboza, which is just violence on a plate, isn't it? I think that would be an outstanding next fight for him, because Barboza's just outside that top 2 or 3. If you can get past him, you're there, and I think that's a natural next one for him. I think they might be looking at Kevin Lee against Barboza for later this year, but from a stylistic point, basically Gaethje versus anybody. Just make sure you're watching his next fight. Unbelievable performance. Took him 3 goes to get the backflip off the cage sorted, but he managed to get it done. And I don't know how many more times he's going to be allowed to do that. You can see the commissioner's getting a little twitchy, and apparently they had a word with him afterwards. But that's his trademark: backflips off the cage and brilliant fights. We've seen him in a few for World Series. Now he's going to bring him to the UFC. Elsewhere on that card, Jesse Taylor. It was tough redemption, Sandhu. I know you didn't watch all of the season, but it was titled Tough Redemption. There was no better man to win that season than Jesse Taylor, the man who looked like he was the man to win the Ultimate Fighter way back when he first competed, only to throw it all away by kicking in a limousine window and trashing a hotel. Now he's gone away, and I actually counted out. I tweeted on the night. It was tough 25. Jesse Taylor, since he got cut from the UFC, because he did fight once in the UFC, and he got cut, he fought for 25 different promotions since leaving the UFC. Then he comes back, fights in tough, wins the thing. I would assume they'll give him a couple of fights. Like, the contract isn't part of the prize now. He gets $250,000. Not bad work if you can get it. And spare a thought too for Diego Lima. He's now a 2-time tough final loser, which I think must be some sort of record as well. So, very unlucky. But Taylor's been around a bit, and I think he deserves his shot, Sandhu.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't watch the show like we've discussed over the last I suppose couple of months. But I suppose in regards to what it means to redeem yourself and redeem your career, that narrative, that story got a nice ending for this show and this series in Jesse, becoming the Ultimate Fighter. I think the best thing about it is the fact that he's got a nice pay packet out of it, $290,000. And, he said straight away that, he's going to put it towards his kids' college fund. Going to put it to good use, which, only comes, with maturity and becoming a responsible adult, so to speak. He wasn't exactly displaying the skills and qualities of a responsible adult in his first run in the UFC during that initial Ultimate Fighter show. But good for him. Good for him. How what this means for the future, time will tell. But at least he's got a nice little platform to bounce off of now and try and just rake up as much cash as he possibly can in this new UFC run of his. Yeah,
he's been, as I say, he's been all over the place trying to earn his spot back in, and I don't know. I doubt he's going to end up challenging for championships or anything in the UFC. I think for him, winning tough was his UFC title. I think that's his story. Everything now is a bonus for him. Hopefully they'll give him a couple of decent fights so he can showcase what he's got and just see how much of a run he can go on. But I thought it was a nice, you know me, mate. I'm a sucker for a romantic sporting storyline, and this was definitely one. So kudos to JT Money, Jesse Taylor, and he really is JT Money after the weekend. As you say, 290k, not bad work. Two people who could potentially earn a few bucks in the years to come went head to head. Gegard Mousasi versus Mark Diakiese. We were pumped for this one beforehand. Obviously, we know a lot about Mark Diakiese. We've watched him. Didn't know as much about Gegard Mousasi. We knew he was tough. But I'll be honest, I thought Diakiese was going to handle him. Gegard Mousasi fought superbly, and the leg kicks really did make their mark early on. And that, for me, was what really turned the fight in his favour against Diakiese. The fight went the distance. Gegard Mousasi got the deserved victory. And then afterwards, he went off on Diakiese again. And normally when fights finish, and if there's any bad blood beforehand, it normally gets squashed at the end of a fight. But he didn't want to do any of that. He later apologised in the back because he called all British fighters bums. Yeah, it was. I thought it was a fun fight to watch, but it was kind of a shame. And I have a feeling we're going to see these two fight again one day. That was Diakiese's first ever defeat as a professional. What did you make of his performance, and how quickly would you like to see him back in there?
Yeah, that's a good question, Simon. I mean, I think one of the things we spoke about on last week's show was the fact that it's been amazing to see Diakiese get so many fights in. Still within the first year of his UFC run, hasn't tasted defeat before, and I suppose sometimes you strike while the iron is hot, as they say, right? Now, looking back, hindsight being what it is, maybe it might not have been a good idea to kind of rush so many fights back to back like that. Maybe in hindsight, it would have been better for him to kind of continue to develop his game. He's been out there at American Top Team, grafting away, adding to his skill set. He's still only in his early 20s, only 24 years old. But that's hindsight, Coming into the contest itself, we were really high on Diakiese, and rightly so, because he's been phenomenal, not just before his UFC run, but particularly in his UFC run. Now that he suffered his defeat, it's a bit of a weird one, because I know fighters want to get in there straight away, just to kind of get back in the win column, get that confidence going again. If he is going to fight sooner rather than later, it might make sense for him to jump back on a European card. We've got Rotterdam around the corner and Gdansk in Poland as well. But this isn't the end. Let's not, I actually think it's good for fighters in a way. I mean, every cloud has a silver lining. But sometimes carrying that undefeated streak and carrying that O can be a big monkey on your back. And now Diakiese doesn't have to worry about it. He's tasted defeat. He knows what it's like physically and mentally to deal with it. He'll still be dealing with it right now. His initial responses on social media have been very, very positive. And, that's what makes a great fighter in the long term, So I'm sure he'll kind of reassess everything, look back at the fight, analyze it, see what went wrong, see where he wasn't able to implement his own game plan, and just improve from it. So I'm actually now looking more forward to his next fight, because I want to see how he rebounds from this.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there's, you speak a lot of sense there. I think this is mixed martial arts. Undefeated records aren't forever. You know what I mean? Very, very rarely do you get a case where a fighter runs all the way to the very top of the sport and stays undefeated on the way. Diakiese's still very young in the sport, and I thought that the fight really did turn very early when Gegard Mousasi nailed Diakiese with a perfectly placed low kick that Mark wasn't able to check. And that really completely altered his game plan. Diakiese ended up having to fight southpaw, and I think that took a lot of his power striking away. That fastball right hand he's got was, that became his lead hand at that point. So I think it took a lot of Diakiese's best tools away from him. It made him relying more on his kicks than perhaps he would have wanted to, which again made him a little more predictable for close. So I think we're going to see Diakiese come roaring back, and I completely agree with you. I think he's still a prospect. What we now know is a little bit more about Gegard Mousasi. As Brits, we haven't seen much of him. And I know that some of our journalist colleagues from the States and Canada, they were quite high on Drakkar Klose going into this fight. So it means we've got two good young prospects on the way up. They've met early in their careers. And as I say, I wouldn't be at all surprised if maybe 2 or 3 years down the line, if they're both still doing well, we might see them go head-to-head again, but possibly with a ranking number next to their name. Who knows? We'll see how it goes in the future for both guys. Last thing to mention for the tough finale, Jared Cannonier kind of laboured really to a late TKO stoppage over very late replacement Nick Roerick, who I think he was due to fight this coming Tuesday at the Dana White Contender Series, which kicks off on Fight Pass. I'm looking forward to that. I'll mention that in a second as well. He was due to fight on that, but then got drafted in as a late replacement to fight Jared Cannonier. Made a good fist of it and did pretty well, I thought. Cannonier won the fight, which was all fine. You know, that's all. You know, the fight was what it was, but the thing that came afterwards was the thing that really interested me. We always talk about fighters maximising their time on the mic, and Cannonier knew exactly who he wanted to call out, and he did it in a respectful way, but he did it in a very clear way. He wants to fight Gokhan Saki, which that's a brave call out, but it's also one that makes a whole lot of sense as well, because Cannonier, it's hard to see where he fits in with the guys above him in that 205-pound division, and because of the way the division is set, there aren't that many really huge names he can build his name off below him. So calling out Gokhan Saki makes a lot of sense to me. And I know the Rotterdam card isn't that far away. It might be too short a turnaround time. But that wouldn't be a terrible matchup to make, I don't think. What do you reckon?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Simon. I completely agree. Gokhan Saki is someone that is going to get a lot of media attention and a relatively decent bit of push from the UFC in just making his debut, you know, whenever that happens. And so for Cannonier to call him out, it's perfect, because you're going to have an opponent that you're most likely going to slot onto a main card for, number one. And hell, if it's in Europe, it may even be a upper echelon main card. It could be like the third, fight from the top, or maybe even a co-main event, because there's so many people that are willing to go and watch a Gokhan Saki fight. They're willing to buy tickets, and he is going to be a bit of a draw in our part of the world here in Europe. So, to get that on your resume, if you can beat him, would be great. And Gokhan Saki is the kind of fighter that knows how to promote a fight, and I'm sure they'll kind of get into it. And yeah, I like it. It makes a lot of sense.
It really does. It really does. Now, while we've been talking, a press release has just dropped into my inbox from Bellator MMA, and Bellator have made a high-profile new signing. You know this because I think you pretty much broke the news. You were the first person to actually put it out there that this looked like it was going to happen. And it has since been 100% confirmed. It has then been rubber stamped. And here we are. Bellator MMA signs top-ranked middleweight Gegard Mousasi to an exclusive multi-fight contract. Very, very interesting signing. When you think that Bellator have recently signed Rory MacDonald and Ryan Bader, you could argue that this Gegard Mousasi signing is right up there with the best of the signings they've made. It's probably between him and Rory Mac, I would say. And he's kind of a double threat, because he can compete at middleweight, or he could jump straight into that light heavyweight division, which they're building up quite nicely, and become a real threat at 205 pounds. Let's not forget, he used to be the Strikeforce 205-pound champion. And, of course, he's very well known to Scott Coker, having fought for that promotion back in the day. So you broke this developing story early on Twitter today, Sandhu. What do you make of the signing? What do you make of the situation with Mousasi? And why do you think that he's opted to go this route rather than re-upping his deal with the UFC?
Well, first of all, we spoke a little bit about this before we started the podcast today, Simon. You and me both, we're not breaking news type reporters. That's just not what we do. That's just not our style. Me, certainly not. I don't cover the sport full time and put in as many hours as a full-time journalist would to establish relationships and have the right connections to do something like this on a regular basis. But today, this morning, was one of those occasions where something fell into my lap, and I ran with it, and it's become, I suppose, the biggest news story of today, at least. And I think, first of all, for Bellator, massive signing. I think it's right up there with the Rory McDonalds and the Chael Sonnens, especially when you take into consideration the win streak that Mousasi is on, and probably a little bit more than just the win streak. I'd say the way Mousasi's personality has just shone through in the last 18 months to 2 years. He's really come on leaps and bounds, and I feel like for a guy, at his age, where he's still in his mid-30s or something like that, he's just finally become, I think, the all-round perfect fighter that is a promoter's dream. He's all action. He finishes fights. He wins fights. For Bellator, he's a European-based fighter. Europe is a massive market where they're making ridiculously great strides in many, many, many markets, especially the UK and Ireland, Italy, and places like that. And Mousasi's got a connection with Scott Coker, of course, like you mentioned. He was, he fought for Scott under the Strike Force era, and he's legitimately a top 5 middleweight in the world. In my opinion, you take every middleweight on planet Earth that fights as a mixed martial artist, Gegard Mousasi is in the top 5. Yeah. So it adds legitimacy, to the Bellator middleweight ranks. It continues that momentum that Bellator just keep on churning out. This last year to 18 months. I mean, I know that Scott Coker's been in charge and at the helm for about, I think, 3 or 4 years now. But it's really been in the last year to 18 months where, they're building an amazing roster, Simon. They're breaking into new international markets. You're starting to see, fighters talk to media and express how happy they are in the Bellator family, how much they're getting paid, some of the deals that they're able to strike and revenue they're able to bring in through sponsorship. It's a win-win. It's a win-win. And I personally, just from the outside looking in, I don't know this, for certain. I think money was a major factor. Mousasi has kind of mentioned that in a few interviews himself. He's at that age where this was probably going to be one of his final major contracts, and where he spends the next couple of years fighting will probably be the peak of his earning power. And I think for him, that probably means a little bit more than a UFC middleweight championship, in my opinion. So if that's the reason that he's done it, good for him, good for Bellator, and good for the sport and good for the industry that things like this now are starting to become more commonplace, because it makes for a very, very interesting time in MMA.
It certainly does, and it opens up the possibility of Bellator maybe investigating a potential show in the Netherlands as well. So... we know that they've got a really strong kickboxing pedigree in Holland, and maybe a few more shrewd signings could really build up a strong fan base over there. I find it really interesting because you look at the situation with the Bellator middleweight division; it's pretty thin, but by having a figurehead, a real name, potentially standing at the top of that division, that then helps you recruit more, because who wants to go and fight in a division full of people you've never heard of? Well, if Gegard's sitting at the top holding the belt, then it makes it a lot easier to recruit other world-class middleweights to that division. That's point number one. Point number two is it also opens up other options at 205. There are already a growing band of top level 205ers beginning to accumulate under the Bellator MMA banner. And Mousasi, while he said in a press release here, I'm coming after the Bellator middleweight championship, the odd busman's holiday at 205 would make a lot of sense to me. So I think it gives them options. Just to give you the quotes from the press release very quickly. Bellator President Scott Coker said, "I'm thrilled to welcome Gegard to the growing Bellator family. He's one of the most well-rounded fighters in all of MMA and can compete in multiple divisions, so that really opens up some exciting matchmaking opportunities for us and for the fans. We're looking forward to having him compete on Spike very soon. And Mousasi's quoted here as saying, "I'm looking forward to fighting in Bellator. I have a long-standing relationship with Scott Coker that goes back many years. Be ready. I'm coming after the Bellator middleweight championship." Don't forget, this is a guy with 50 pro fights on his record. Outstanding record, 42, 6 and 2. And he's beaten a who's who. You know, he's got an incredible record. The more I think about this, the more I think this is as good, if not better, than the Rory McDonald signing. I think they're kind of 1A and 1A, or 1A and 1B. I think they're right up there. Had to break away from the script just to give you that.
Good shout.
Because that is probably the biggest story of the show. So
yeah,
there we go. Gegard Mousasi confirmed he is no longer a UFC fighter. He's now part of Bellator MMA, and he's after that 185-pound Bellator strap. Sure, there'll be a lot more to come on that. Back over on Planet UFC, we look back at UFC 213, which took place on Saturday night at the T-Mobile Arena. And it was a card that was given some sort of late drama. There was a sort of a mini crisis, really, where the main event fell through with literally hours to spare as Amanda Nunes declared herself unfit to fight. From what we're told, she was medically cleared to do so. She was medically cleared to fight. She's since put out a statement saying that she had chronic sinusitis. Anyone who's had sinusitis, who you've seen on Twitter, they'll tell you it's not a fun thing to have. And if, in a sport where you're getting punched in the face, I can't imagine it's too comfortable either. So obviously the UFC were pretty disappointed. Dana White made it very clear that he was disappointed. And you can kind of, to a degree, you can understand that because of when it happened. But also, it's also slightly unrealistic to expect a champion to jump in there if they're not really good to go. So, my opinion, I'll give you mine while I'm rambling, Sandhu. I don't think you should be expected to fight if you're not fit to fight. Okay, the doctors have medically cleared you, but do you know what I mean? And all this talk, I've seen all these keyboard warriors on Twitter saying she's scared. She's not scared. She beat Valentina Shevchenko already. She's absolutely smashed everybody since then. She's a world champion. She's got no reason to be scared of anything. So I don't buy that defense at all. I just think she just wasn't 100% fit. She wasn't good to go. So she's pulled herself out. There's lots of nuances and arguments over whether she should have the power to do that and still have the belt. I think Kevin Ioli asked the question in the press conference. I think it's pretty much as it should be. She wasn't good to go. She's withdrawn herself from the fight. And they're going to try and rebook it. I think they're going to try and do it for UFC 215 in Edmonton in September. So best thing for that, really, just get it booked. Get it rebooked quick as possible. And let's just get the fight made and move on. Do you think there's much drama with this, or is it just a bit of a storm in a teacup, do you think?
It's really unfortunate to have this all played out, Simon. And I think one of the major things to take away from it, it's if you're a fighter and this happens to you, or if you're part of the team, the camp, management, agent, coach, whatever, try and get ahead of the story if you can. Because whoever can get information out first usually controls that narrative.
Spot on.
And it could either be a positive or a negative detriment to you down the line. So, with that being said, the first kind of person or outfit to release any information was Dana White and the UFC through MMA Junkie, and then you start to kind of hear reports where she had passed her medical, and the doctors had approved her medically fit to fight, yet she pulled out. And then you've got Dana White giving quotes where, he's saying it's 90% mental and 10% physical and things of that nature. And I think people have to understand is the UFC machine is massive. It's really hot on a pay-per-view weekend, And even someone like Dana White, who's got millions of Twitter followers, when something like that comes out and you the fighter, still haven't, provided some information, it can be literally a matter of hours, and you've got the whole world against you. It was really unfortunate to see some of the responses online and social media. It's really the ugly part of social media that I personally hate. Just seeing, from fans, MMA fans, mainstream fans, casual fans, what have you, weighing in, just saying, oh, she was scared and she didn't want to fight, she pulled out, and blah, 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 and all the rest of it. Listen, considering what she had to deal with, chronic sinusitis, I've never experienced it, so I can't tell you what it feels like. But yeah, like you said, Simon, I followed a lot of other people sharing their experience with it online, and it seems pretty horrific if you ask me. Let alone having to deal with that when you're a pro MMA fighter, trying to cut weight, you've done all your media obligations, you've done everything, you haven't skipped anything, and you put on a brave face, haven't given the slightest bit of evidence in anything, an interview, the appearance at the weigh-in or anything like that, that there's anything wrong with you whatsoever. So she hit it pretty well. And my inkling is she was trying to battle through it and fight through it as best as she could. And I don't blame her, Simon, because although she beat Ronda Rousey and although, she beat Miesha Tate, I think we would all comfortably agree Valentina Shevchenko was going to be the toughest test of her career to date. Many had picked her to win. I personally had picked Shevchenko to win myself.
Same here.
Right? And I think Amanda knew this was going to be the toughest fight of her life. And for her not to be at 100%, she would be doing herself a disservice and doing herself a massive injustice. She needs to go into a fight and leave on the other end, even if she loses, knowing that she gave everything and she can't have any regrets. And for her to make the decision, which would have hurt her, emotionally, in the public eyes, and also financially, because she didn't get a penny. And she's got coaches and agents to pay for and other expenses, what have you. It hurt her. So, but the most important thing is now when this fight gets rebooked, and it looks like it will be in Edmonton for the pay-per-view in September, hopefully everything goes well for her during camp and that week, and she is able to fight Shevchenko, and we'll finally get to see this fight. But it's just really unfortunate in terms of how the timeline played out of information coming out regarding this.
It's really interesting, this, because we've seen two high-profile instances of a female UFC champion who the way that they've dealt with the media or haven't dealt with the media has had an enormous effect on how the fan base and the public view them. You look at Germaine de Randamie, and now you look at Amanda Nunes. Germaine de Randamie, we've both met Germaine during our coverage of European events. Absolutely lovely person to talk to, lovely to deal with. Made a major error in the way she's handled things over the last few weeks, particularly in terms of her communication of things. And it's hurt her career. Amanda Nunes, I had the pleasure of meeting her in New York. There was a media luncheon in New York. I wasn't sat on her table. I was sat on a different table, but she's absolutely lovely to deal with as well. And these aren't people who are looking to pull the wool over people's eyes or pull a fast one and sort of try and sneak their way around getting in the cage and fighting. These are elite level athletes who make their money by getting in the cage and fighting. And I think it goes back to your point about controlling the narrative. I think when a fight falls through, the obvious first place to hear about it is the UFC. But her team needed to be hot on the heels of that announcement with a social media statement, Instagram post, Twitter comment, whatever it might be, or a press release out to all of the major outlets saying she's got sinusitis, blah, 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 blah. This is why we're not fighting. We'd like to apologise to the UFC. We want to apologise to Valentina. We will endeavour to get this fight back on as soon as we possibly can. That, at least, it's damage limitation. That didn't happen. It took many hours before we heard anything. And by then, it had already, Dana had done a whole load of interviews. And in doing the interviews and talking about the subject over and over again, you could see him becoming more frustrated with the situation as well. That just sort of led to the whole thing escalating. And really, something that could have been nipped in the bud very, very quickly wasn't. And I think Amanda was let down a little bit, if I'm honest. I think that information needed to come out as quickly as the UFC statement did. It really needed to be straight after.
Yep.
So if UFC statement comes out at 2:01, you want to be pinging. You want to be hitting send on your social media post or your press release. So yeah, hopefully I think the best thing from here, get them in a fight. Hopefully 2:15 as has been suggested, and then we can move on. That was the drama at the start of the event. Thankfully, we had another world title fight on the card. It was an interim title fight for the middleweight belt. Robert Whittaker, Yoel Romero. Everyone was expecting it to be a cracker. It was a cracker. It was a great fight. Romero won the first 2 rounds. On my card, I think he won the first 2 rounds on all 3 judges' cards as well. He also badly injured Robert Whittaker's left knee in that first round, to the point that Whittaker was basically fighting on one leg for the rest of the fight. But somehow, Bobby Knuckles managed to grit his teeth, and his corner were brilliant. They just kept it nice and calm. They were flip-flopping between the corners on the coverage. And especially at the end of the fight, Romero's corner were going sort of frantic at him, saying, "You've got to win this round, you've got to win this round." Whittaker's corner, nice and calm. Make sure you win this one. Win this one, you're home. It's all good. But I thought that Whittaker's corner were outstanding. They managed to get him not thinking about the injury and just knowing what job he had to do in the next 5 minutes. I thought Whittaker fought superbly because he had to change his game plan. Won rounds 3, 4, and 5. Finished with a pretty dominant fifth round. And he's now the interim UFC middleweight champ. How impressed were you with the Reaper, Robert Whittaker?
Really, really impressed, Simon. I mean, I don't have the verbiage or the vocabulary to describe how amazing it was to see him come back from those first couple of rounds. First of all, let me just say I've thoroughly enjoyed that main event. It had me at the edge of my seat the entire time. It was made my palms sweaty. You just didn't know what was going to happen next, because both guys, you got Yoel, who's so kind of unpredictable in his movement and the way he goes about his business in the cage, and then you had Whittaker, who's obviously visibly so impaired with a leg injury. So you were trying to figure out how he was going to kind of muster up the guts and the intestinal fortitude to actually continue and figure out a game plan to come back, because he was down 2 rounds. And I think universally everyone had it scored the same way. You had Yoel Romero 10-9 the first 2 rounds, and then you had Robert Whittaker 10-9 rounds 3, 4, and 5. I don't think I saw anybody else with anyone else's scorecard that I actually respect any different to that. And it was amazing, Simon. It really was. I mean, he's gone through a murderer's row pretty much, except for the champ Michael Bisping right at the top there. And Robert Whittaker in his mid-20s, what a great story. It went a little bit pear-shaped for him at welterweight. He goes up to middleweight, much, much healthier for him at that weight class, and he's putting on the best performances of his career. Australia now has, albeit an interim, a UFC champion. That's massive. And now it's going to hopefully help the sport explode even further. I mean, it's pretty much been doing fairly well anyway, with so many UFC events taking place there, especially marquee events. But now this should take it leaps and bounds. Hopefully, the UFC PR machine is going to help Whittaker get a lot of interviews with some mainstream outlets there, late night shows. Hopefully, it'll help him get more sponsorship deals in Australia to help him financially and what have you. And now it sets up the title unification bout with Michael Bisping. And I think, again, universally, everyone's happy with that. It's almost like normal service is about to or has resumed in the UFC middleweight division. The UFC and Dana White has said that the GSP Bisping fight is now pretty much done and dusted as a thing of the past. You had Michael Bisping square off with Whittaker in the cage afterwards, and Bisping was on top form all night long with some of his antics, and I'm sure we're going to get to this in a little while with some of the questions, but I think what you do, Simon, to continue to keep Bisping happy, because obviously that George St. Pierre fight was and still potentially could be the biggest payday of his career. However, to put a positive spin on it, if you put Bisping and Whittaker's unification bout on the same card as a main or co-main event to a GSP returning to the welterweight division, fighting the winner of a Tyron Woodley, Damian Maia, then everybody's happy, right? So, but without having to focus too much of the attention away from Whittaker or Bobby Knuckles, as pretty much he's well known now in our little MMA bubble. Really unbelievable performance. One of the performances of the year so far, and it'll probably be a top 5 performance when you look back at it at the end of the year. And fantastic performance, and congratulations to Bobby Knuckles.
Absolutely. And looking at the future events calendar for the UFC, we currently have a UFC Fight Night event scheduled for Sydney, Australia on the 18th of November. Now, I could see a couple of potential things happening in November if Bisping and Whittaker can both get themselves fit. Then there's good amount of lead time for them both to rehab any little injuries they've got. I guess it depends on how serious Whittaker's injury is. 18th of November, that event could be bumped up to pay-per-view status. You could send GSP down there. You could put Ioane and Jacek down there. She did very well down there in Australia previously, and the fans really took to her. So you could do something down there and really sort of give that a bit of a beef up, upgrade it from Fight Night to pay-per-view status, stack the card, get all of the Australian fighting talent on your roster, your Tyson Pedros and Damian Brown and people like that. Get them all on the card and see if you can really make that something quite big. The other thing is there is currently no event scheduled. There's currently no event scheduled for Saturday the 11th of November. And I can't help but think that may be occupied by a UFC event at Madison Square Garden eventually. It's kind of the same time of year that we had it last year. So if the stars align, you might just see an MSG event, because there's no MSG event announced yet this year. We know they want to go back. We know that November is the most likely time for them to go back. November the 11th, given that they've got events every weekend after that in November, I think November the 11th could end up being an MSG event. And it fits exactly into what you said. We could have Conor McGregor potentially returning to the UFC on that show. We could also have Michael Bisping versus Robert Whittaker on that show. Who knows? I think there are options there, and I'm sure there's lots of things being discussed. And the wheels of that big UFC machine that you mentioned earlier are going to be turning as they look to put their chess pieces in place for the back end of this year. I think we're going to see some big fights. And Bisping versus Whittaker, I think, will be a great one. So look forward to seeing that. Got to say, I know we're the Brit Pack. We are, we're pleased that we have a world champion in Michael Bisping ripping up another nation's flag at cage-side. Not cool, Michael Bisping. Not cool. That probably, it's all banter to him. He doesn't give a stuff, does he? But other people, they take that kind of thing quite seriously. Yoel Romero has responded on social media. I think we both tweeted about it today. He took a photo of Michael Bisping holding the British flag, and while smoking a Havana, set the thing on fire and burnt it. Now, burning a photo of a guy with a flag is bad, but I think we need to stand up for our buddy, Per Hallistam. MMA Junkie Per, as he is on Twitter. That was Per's picture. What are you burning his pictures for? You can't be doing that. Anyway, Per tweeted Yoel Romero and got a little like. So it sounds like Yoel's sort of taking it in good humour. And I thought the way he reacted to his loss actually was top class. Yoel Romero came across really well. Very philosophical. Seemed quite happy, although I'm sure he was absolutely crestfallen to missed out on a shot at the guy he really wanted to get his hands on. Yeah, great stuff from Yoel Romero. What did you make of the whole flag business? Both first from Bisping and then from Romero. Is this all just a bit of silliness that we could have done without?
I'll be honest with you, Simon. I'm okay with most things when it comes to promotion in the fight game, unless you're kind of really kind of going after, say, someone's kind of like sexual orientation, or it's a super racially toned kind of attack or something like that. That doesn't sit well with me, and it wouldn't wash well with most people. But I think what we've got here is something that I love because it's straight out of the pro wrestling playbook. And you know what? The funny thing is what we've seen. I think just starting from the Gary Cook era, when Gary Cook was kind of brought in by the UFC, the kind of the mandate at the time was try and make the UFC as international as possible. They really try and highlight the nationalities of fighters, and you see that with the fight kit colors. You see that with the promotional material that'll come up. You'll see that on social media, and I think the fact that both Yoel and Bisping have gone back and forth now, attacking each other's flags, it's all fun and games. It's all fun and games, and I think what you've got now, it's funny because although Yoel Romero lost on Saturday night, I really want to see Romero Bisping big time. I really want to see that fight, and I hope at some point before Bisping and Romero both call it a day, considering their ages. I hope they get it on, because this has been bubbling now for a good year. It's been bubbling for a while, and every time they interact in whatever shape, way, or form it is, it just escalates. But it escalates within the realms that I'm comfortable with, and I'm happy. I'm comfortable saying that, and I'm just it ticks my boxes. Put it that way, Simon. I'm comfortable with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think people's sort of boundaries and all the rest of it. I think if you just did it within the confines of the UK, I think people would be very much of your opinion. I think if you look at it internationally, imagine if it was someone burning the American flag, all hell would have broken loose. Or, someone would have been tearing up an American flag. That would have gone down like the proverbial poo sandwich, right? It would not have been good, right? So I think because of the way that different nations have, the respect they have for their flag, I think it's kind of teetering on the line of whether it's acceptable or not. Internationally, we might be okay with it over here, but it's not our nation that we're sort of disrespecting when we're tearing flags up. So, you know what I mean? So it's kind of, I thought it was, I mean, when I saw Yoel Romero burning a photo of Bisping and the Union flag, I wasn't outraged in any way. In any way. The thing I found, the main emotion I took from it was, that's Pear's picture. That's hilarious. But I viewed it very much as sort of as banter. But I do know that different nations have a lot more reverence for their flag than perhaps we do over here. So I think it's a bit of a tricky one. And Bisping sometimes he does tread that line sometimes. But I wouldn't be surprised if someone just said, "Take it easy, Mike. Just take it easy." But that was a great fight. And Bisping Romero, if you want Bisping Romero to happen, you got to be cheering on Bisping to beat Robert Whittaker, because I think if Bisping loses his belt, I think he hangs his gloves up. So we'll see what happens. And even then, I don't know if that Romero fight will ever happen. I have a feeling that ship may have sailed with Romero's defeat to Whittaker at the weekend. But we will see. We will see. Also on that 213 card, we were hoping to come away knowing who the next top contender for the UFC heavyweight title might be, but we don't. Alistair Overeem took on current number one ranked heavyweight Fabricio Verdum, former UFC champion Verdum, against former Strikeforce and K1 Grand Prix champion Alistair Overeem. And it wasn't vintage stuff, was it? It was pretty low key. Overeem, who used to just be a marauding kickboxer who had good submissions, and he just used to steamroll people. Now he's very safety first, fights off the back foot, and it was a pretty nondescript fight, really. It wasn't that interesting and exciting to watch. Overeem won the first two rounds just. Verdum clearly won the third round. One judge scored it a draw, the other two scored it for Overeem. I think the plan was for him to win that fight and call for a title shot. Dana White said, "You're not getting a title shot of a performance like that." Given that that's been said, Sandhu, who do you want to see Overeem fight next?
Wow, that's an interesting question and a good question. I guess you got to wait and see what the outcome is of the Francis Ngannou fight, right?
With JDS.
With JDS, yeah. You got Francis Ngannou fighting JDS now. Is Kane book signed? I can't remember right now.
I don't know if he is. I don't know if he is.
Okay. Well, here's what I do. If Francis Ngannou has an amazing performance, starches JDS, in my opinion, you give him the shot. You put him right up there with in the title fight with Stipe Miocic. It's a fresh fight for Miocic. Francis Ngannou's got a ton of momentum. He's a bit of a fan favorite with Dana White at the moment. He's out there in Las Vegas. He's moved out there now, so he's training in the Performance Institute pretty much daily. And then I think perhaps as a co-main event, you perhaps book an Overeem and Cain Velasquez or something like that. Going by the rankings as they currently are, Cain Velasquez is number 2, Alistair Overeem is number 3. I've got a feeling that'll change to 1 and 2 come this week's update with Verdum losing. He's actually currently occupying that number 1 spot as we currently speak. And that's the way I'd do it. I agree. I don't think with a performance like that you can justifiably give Overeem the title shot. It needs to be something a bit more rubber stamped. And again, even if they match him up with Kane, that'll be a fresh matchup, and it's a fight that we should have seen quite some time ago. But we haven't seen it so far. So I would love to see Overeem and Cain Velasquez get it on, and that could be a nice co-main event to Miocic versus Francis Ngannou if he is to beat JDS.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting to see what's going to happen here, just because the heavyweight picture is kind of muggy at the moment. It's kind of messy, and because there isn't a clear number 1 contender. You know, you had Verdum was there, but hasn't really looked that convincing. Obviously, he's dropped a couple of fights now. Overeem is there or thereabouts. Could have won the title fight, but made a bad error in the fight and ended up getting knocked out. I think Ngannou is the guy who, I think if he gets past JDS, he gets the title fight, no question. I just checked out Cain Velasquez while you were talking to Sandhu. Almost to the day, it's a year since he last fought. He fought. We're recording this on July the 10th, 2017, and Travis Brown was Cain Velasquez's last opponent, and that was on July the 9th, 2016, at UFC 200. He hasn't fought since, and he isn't booked to fight again yet. So that may well be the one to make. That may well be the one to make. So we'll see. I'm struggling to think of another viable option really, unless Miocic is going to take a bit of a breather, and then they can do Ngannou versus Overeem if Ngannou gets past JDS. We'll see, because obviously Overeem's got a knockout win over JDS. If Ngannou gets a knockout win over JDS, they're both in a position where they got comparable performance against a common opponent. So I don't know. It's a tricky one, but what we do know is that Miocic stands head and shoulders clear at the top of that UFC heavyweight division. One person who isn't going to be challenging for the UFC title anytime soon is Mr. Travis Brown, who has had a remarkable fall from grace after being ranked as high as 3rd, I think, in the UFC heavyweight division at one point, and was considered as someone who could potentially be a heavyweight champion in the future. But he lost to Alexei Oleinik, and I called it on last week's show, Sandhu. I called it on last week's show. If you fancy a bet, get Oleinik by submission, and lo and behold, he won by submission. Fought well, and that's 4 losses on spin for Travis Brown. I think it's 5 out of 6, and I think it might even be 6 out of his last 8. That's not great. And Dana White was asked about this in the post-fight press conference, and he made no bones about what he thought should happen next. He said he thinks Travis Brown should retire. So should he retire? Should he go off and fight for someone else? What next for Travis Brown?
Well, I personally don't think he can hang in the UFC anymore. That's for certain. He's just not good enough, Simon. He's just not good enough right now. Can he? Is he athletic enough? Does he have the resources to get back to the monster he was a few years ago? Yes. Again, outside looking in, I don't know the details, but it seems to be that the turning point for this recent run of losses for him was when he went to Glendale Fight Club. That was just a something that kind of coincided with this run. Before that, he was with Jackson Winklejohn, which is a fantastic gym team camp, one of the best in the world. And he was doing pretty well under them, Simon. Not bad at all. And he made a decision that I personally feel as though has impacted his career ever since. I think he needs to leave the UFC. I don't know if he should retire. That's a personal choice for a fighter. It's not as if, I suppose, he's in his 40s like Fedor, getting clipped and knocked out in the first round or anything. He's fairly competitive, but it's just he's losing fights. He's competing, but he's losing, and he's continuing to lose time and time again. I think he'd be a perfect signing for a Bellator, the number 2 promotion in the world right now. It keeps him. It would keep him if they were to sign him in the public limelight for North America, being on Spike. I think it'd be a great addition to their heavyweight roster. You could always do him versus Matt Mitrione again. That's a nice little fight there, considering how the last fight went between the two in controversial circumstances. And but yeah, no, I don't think he should retire personally, but I don't think he's good enough to hang in the UFC anymore.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I thought it was interesting, and it was actually something that our friend John Morgan brought up on his podcast, MMA Roadshow. Is the fact that Dana saying that he should retire, rather than does that mean that he wants Travis to remove himself from the UFC by retiring, rather than have the UFC cut him, which then allows him to go and fight for Bellator? Now, Travis Brown going and fighting for Bellator, in and of itself, probably won't be a huge concern for the UFC, given Brown's form. But Travis Brown's about to marry Ronda Rousey. And even just the name value of having Ronda sat at cage side, and just little things like that, you can bet Bellator wouldn't mind giving Ronda Rousey a little bit of screen time on their shows. It just helps build the mystique around their own brand, that this is where big stars are fighting, but there's big stars watching as well. So I don't know whether there's anything to be said in that. It was an interesting thought when that was mentioned. So we'll have to see what happens. But I tend to agree with you. I think the days of Travis Brown as a legitimate contender in the UFC heavyweight division are probably gone. And in the heavyweight division of any combat sport, the minute you start getting beat regularly, you have a major problem from a longevity point of view, because you normally can't sort of manage your way through fights at heavyweight, because you either get smashed or you don't. So it'd be interesting to see where his next move is, whether it's retirement, whether it's looking to get released so that he can then go and fight for someone else. But we'll have to wait and see on Travis Brown. Let's do some questions, Sandhu. Let's do some questions.
Let's do it. So thank you everyone for tweeting your questions in. As always, you can reach out to us at the Brit Pack MMA. That is the Twitter handle, and you don't have to wait until we put the call out. You can always do it throughout the week. If you Fight Night, it's always a good one. Everyone's always active on social media. Come Fight Night, something controversial happens, you want to talk about it or actually get our opinion on it, hit us up at the Brit Pack and we'll include it in the show on a Monday night. So the first one comes in from Stuart Tuckwell, and he asks, who would you give the next heavyweight title shot to? Overeem, Kane, or wait to see if Ngannou beats Dos Santos at UFC 215? Well, we've pretty much already covered that one, Simon. You know what my thoughts are on that. But Stuart does follow up with the second question, and he says, who would you like to see Gaethje fight next? And I think any of the top 8 ranked lightweights would all be good to see. We kind of covered that a little bit earlier on as well, Simon, in terms of fantasy. But being realistic, I suppose, who do you think the UFC will match up Gaethje with next?
Edson Barbosa. I think that's the common sense matchup. If you want one out of left field, look out for Al Iaquinta. Al Iaquinta, he wants fights. He wants to fight. I think he's a bit frustrated with the UFC. I think that would be an absolute tear-up between those two. Al can bang, Gaethje can bang. If the pieces don't quite fit to give Gaethje a top 5 opponent yet, maybe Al Iaquinta might be a good backup option. But the fight I'd like to see is Gaethje versus Edson Barboza, and I want to see it as a main event. I don't think we'll need 5 rounds, but just in case it goes past 3, I think we'll feel cheated if that fight ever went to the scorecards. So give him the full 5 rounds, and let's see what you can do against the most dangerous kicker in probably in all of MMA, Edson Barboza.
Well, he has just gone on the MMA Hour as we've been recording this episode, and he's gone on the record as saying he'd like to fight Tony Ferguson next. Now, in my personal opinion, I want the UFC to rebook Khabib versus Ferguson. That's just my personal opinion. And I think I want to see Gaethje in one more high-profile fight before you start to put him in that lightweight title picture, whether it's interim or the legitimate one, right? But he has said if he can't get the Ferguson fight, he wants Alvarez or the winner of Alvarez/Poirier if the UFC do rebook that fight. And he wants to return in November, which is interesting because we've already talked about the possibility of an MSG card. And actually, speaking about the possibility of the MSG card, I know that the Friday night before that particular week, Joe Rogan has actually got a venue booked for a stand-up gig in New York. So,
wow, what do you know?
So I can't remember who it was that flagged that up with me a few days ago, but somebody hit me up on Twitter just to kind of mention that, and I thought that was an interesting booking for Joe Rogan, considering he's based out there in California. So it looks like that'll get announced officially pretty soon, and Gaethje wants in on the MSG card. It looks like or a fight in November, and Alvarez would make sense, or the winner of Alvarez Poirier makes sense. Your suggestion, Simon, would also make the world of sense as well. The next question comes in from Andrew Matthews, who says, is Bisping versus Whittaker in Australia the biggest possible UFC pay-per-view ever that they could do outside of the Americas? In short, no, because Ronda Rousey fought in Australia a couple of years ago, and I think I'm pretty comfortable in saying that's going to be the biggest, or that has been the biggest event pay-per-view wise outside of America, both in terms of gate attendance and actual pay-per-view numbers as well. That I'm sure that did a million north. Now, you mentioned, Simon, that there is a date in Sydney in November, but it's a fight night. Now, yes. Technically, the UFC could always pull an audible, like they did recently by moving the event in Seattle, or essentially nixing it, and then pushing a pay-per-view into Edmonton. They can always do stuff like that, right? But I've got a feeling that they wouldn't want to do something like that and hold 2 pay-per-views in the same month of November when you've got a blockbuster one potentially being held in MSG in Madison Square Garden, right? So as much as I'd love to see something like that take place in Australia, we both know what it's like when you have a champion hold a pay-per-view in his home country, where we're fortunate to see Michael do that, Michael Bisping, at the back end of last year. I've got a feeling that as a sweetener for Bisping to now fight Whittaker instead of fighting GSP, they're going to put him on that MSG card, and they're going to go all guns blazing on that card. I'm sure it'll be a massive blockbuster event and a pay-per-view, and that's the way I think they're going to go.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. And here's the thing, like the question I think was, is it the biggest possible pay-per-view that they could ever do outside of the Americas? The biggest pay-per-view that the UFC could ever do anywhere is putting Conor McGregor in a big arena somewhere in any part of the world. If Croke Park, and I know this is probably never going to happen because it would have done by now, if the UFC says, you know what, we're going to do this just because we can. We're going to go and do this. We're going to do Croke Park next summer, 80,000 people, 90,000 people. That'll be the biggest pay-per-view outside the Americas, because if Conor's on the card, everyone's watching it. And it doesn't matter what time of day it's on, people will be watching it. So I think that's that's always going to be the biggest in reserve. If Ronda ever comes back, and there are rumblings that she might, just for one more against Miesha Tate, maybe we might see that at Madison Square Garden later this year, or possibly, more likely, the 30th of December show. Don't forget that. That might well happen. Tate v Rousey 3, just to give them both a final send-off in a super fight, and gives the UFC a huge fight to round off the year, irrespective of anything else that might be going on. So yeah, when Ronda fights, it's a massive deal. When Conor McGregor fights, it's an even bigger deal. So wherever they fight, if they put a pay-per-view on outside of the Americas with one or both of them, that's the biggest pay-per-view.
Final question this week comes in from Talia Kicks, who says, how did yous get into MMA journalism? I've got a feeling this person's Scottish. And any advice for fellow upcoming MMA reporters / journalists from the UK or Europe? So Simon, you and me both got a different path in many respects, I suppose. I suppose I can kick off with this one, Simon, and you can go into it. I had absolutely zero aspirations in getting into this field whatsoever. And like I mentioned at the start of the show, I'm still not doing this full time. I haven't done this full time whatsoever. I'm still holding down a full-time job. I'm a freelance contributor to MMA Junkie. It fits well with my schedule. It doesn't really interfere too much with work. I can cover the European events. I've been privileged enough to cover a few big US blockbuster pay-per-views once in a while as well. And I've tried to do the best that I can, given the platforms that I've got at my disposal. That being social media, that being this podcast with my good friend Simon Head. And my background is actually in film production. I did a film studies degree, and that's how I was initially able to find a bit of a niche within covering the sport. Now you can cover anything, any subject, any topic area, any industry in many different facets in 2017. Social media, video, radio, audio, like a podcast, writing. Now, within all of those bits and pieces, I suppose I would say where I excel at the most is on social media and video content. I produce video content. That's how me and my good friend Abu Suban, who is now a salaried member of the MMA Junkie team, the majority of the video content that you see on MMA Junkie has probably been chopped up by Abby. Me and him started a YouTube channel many, many years ago now. I'd come up with the concepts and the ideas. Little did I know at the time that I'd also have to double up as on-camera talent, which is something that I wasn't prepared for in getting into this field. And it's something that was actually a massive learning curve for me. I feel as though now I'm at the stage where I'm comfortable being on camera, interviewing fighters, doing the whole thing with the mic stick and what have you. But that's not initially why I wanted to get into this. I wanted to find myself in a situation where I could add value. And fortunately, both me and Abby working really hard together, producing some excellent video content on our YouTube channel, got snapped up by MMA Junkie. And it was John Morgan who initially gave us the first opportunity by bringing us into the fold, introducing us to the team. And since then, we were able to do so many great little projects. The one that comes to mind is the one that really puts on the map big time. And it was a profile piece on, at the time, the last woman to beat Ronda Rousey, a lady by the name of Edith Bosch, based out of the Netherlands. But without getting into too much detail, here I am in 2017. I'm covering the sport. Any advice I'd give to journalists, I said, look, or aspiring journalists, I said, look, if you're maybe 16, 17, 18, and you're going to go to university, and you can afford to go to university, I personally still think that doing a degree is your best bet. I've not been able to do that because I'm not going to spend another 30 grand or whatever it costs these days to do a degree at my age. Fortunately for me, I've had mentors like John Morgan. I've had friends like Simon Head who are well more experienced in this game and this field than I am. And so in a way, my apprenticeship in covering this sport and the people that I would have been able to lean upon for advice and guidance doing what I do are the best in the business. So I feel really comfortable in terms of how I've been able to kind of refine my tools, so to speak. But if you're at that age and you're a teenager wanting to get into this field or any field covering, any topic area or sport, what have you, as a journalist, go and do a degree, get some good 3 years of educational experience under your belt, while at the same time trying to hustle and build up your social media profile when you've got the time available at your hands. Try and do what nobody else is doing. Try and be unique and whatever coverage that is, whether it's written or audio or video, social media. And if you do that and you stay the course, the opportunities will come your way. I hope that I've been able to kind of answer the question as best as I can from my ability, Simon. But like I said, we've both had vastly different paths to get to this point. So I'll just turn it over to you so you can share your story.
Yeah, I'm a sports journalist. I've been a sports journalist for 18 years. I started out, first journalist job I did. I worked for free for about 3-4 years doing hospital radio, and I worked on TalkSport before it was actually on the radio. It used to be on the internet. And I used to write the scripts for the weekend sports breakfast show. Very briefly, I was there for a bit on what it was effectively like unpaid work experience, and I ended up doing some other bits and pieces, and then became a football journalist. I was a football journalist for about 10-15 years, working in the betting and gaming sector for a while, and then when I moved across and got into working for the Daily Mirror, I'd done a load of football stuff in the past, working for the FA and a few other places as well. Once I joined the Mirror, I kind of joined the Mirror doing a job I didn't want to do. It was just a web producer job, and the plan was always get in the building and then sort of finagle my way back up into editorial. Managed to do that, and one of the ways I did it was they used to have a load of blogs. One of the blogs was called Ringside, and it was a WWE blog, but it also had just a little bit of mixed martial arts coverage on it. It was just UFC back then. They didn't really worry about anything else. And I became very good friends with the guy who ran it, and still am today. And we decided, from him doing the wrestling and me doing the MMA, as his time gradually started getting pulled away to do other projects, we'd flip the blog over. So it became an MMA blog first. And then when I eventually got promoted to become the sport production editor. So I was in charge of running all of the sport that wasn't football online for the Mirror. And they were going through a site redesign. I managed to petition to get MMA onto the main Mirror website. And we managed to get that done. So we then managed to establish the Mirror's MMA coverage on the main Mirror website rather than as some little sideline. So very proud of that. We got that going. That became a huge traffic driver for the website. I then joined BT Sport just before they launched, working on the digital side for them, doing football, MotoGP, and looking after their UFC coverage online. Then I joined The Sun, was their full-time MMA journalist and reporter, it was a great opportunity working full-time covering the sport that I love. And unfortunately, they decided that they could do it on the cheap, and they decided to make me redundant just before they needed to give me a redundancy payoff. So that was nice of them. And I'm now freelance. But so I've been in the sort of the journalistic sphere for about 18 years now, and it's been great fun. The last 2 years with The Sun, I managed to actually travel the world and see events I never dreamt of. You know, my first ever event on American soil was UFC 189, McGregor versus Chad Mendes, International Fight Week. Absolutely bonkers event, and I've been at every McGregor fight since then. Yeah, every McGregor fight since then I've been at, and it's been an amazing experience. It's been great fun, and I'm now working freelance doing stuff for the BBC and a few other places, doing a few bits of BT Sport, and a few other places as well. So that's what I'm doing now. But in terms of advice, the best thing to do is decide what you're good at and do that. So if you're a video editor and you like to shoot and edit video, do that. If you like writing, write. If you like talking, do podcasts. But just create your own, be your own outlet to start with. Build up all your social media profile, but basically be your own outlet to start with. And just, it's all about getting reps. Just repetitions all the time. Doesn't matter if the stuff you're putting out to start with isn't perfect. Just put stuff out, pow, pow, pow. Just keep doing it. Refine it, change it, get feedback. Contact people in the industry who are in the positions that you want to be in. Ask for their advice. You'd be surprised how forthcoming a lot of guys are, and are prepared to give you a little bit of guidance and advice and all the rest of it. It's something that I think will probably be very useful to you. And do it for yourself first. And the other thing is, if you want to work in MMA journalism, don't just do MMA. That would be my other advice. If you're in the UK, do other sport. If you can be someone who can cover a multitude of different sports, that makes you more useful and might get you in the building somewhere, or get you on a site somewhere, or in a publication somewhere. And then once you're in, you can then start to sell the virtues of covering MMA as part of that. So if you're looking just at MMA, like, the opportunities are absolutely ridiculously small. I was the only full-time UK MMA journalist. Like, Gareth Davis covers other sports. He's probably the highest profile British journalist, I would say. He's been covering boxing predominantly, and he does MMA, and he does disability sport, and he does other stuff. He doesn't just do MMA. For 2 years, I was very fortunate enough to do just MMA, and it was great. But since that job, since I was made redundant from that job in January this year, there is no safety net. There's nowhere else to go. So there wasn't another role I could just jump into. No other publication in the UK were like, yes, we're going to cover this now. The way they do it, it doesn't work like that. So the best thing is be versatile, be able to do lots of different things. And that goes with disciplines as well. If you don't know how to edit video and audio yet, work on practicing, teach yourself, and then become a sort of a triple threat. If you can do video, audio, written, and you can write about more than one sport and become an authority on more than one sport, then you're a value to someone. Other than that, just reps, get reps, ask questions, and don't expect things to happen quick, because they really don't. Do it because you love it. And then if you end up in a job where you love what you're doing, then you've made it, irrespective of what meager salary you might get paid, because journalism doesn't pay very much. So if you can do it for the love of it, then great. And the other thing, because I'm going on a bit now. The other thing is cover your local shows, because you won't get credentialed for a UFC or a Bellator show if you're just starting out. But your local MMA show will probably be more than happy to have you. And it's those shows where you can really build yourself up. Look at Severe MMA. They're a great example of this. They started out in Ireland, and they were covering a lot of the Irish scene. So they became very well known among the Irish camps over there, Team Rhino, SBG. And what happened? Their fighters started to take off. SBG had that crop of fighters: Conor McGregor, Carl Pendred, Paddy Houlihan. They all sort of rose up together and ended up in the UFC. And Severe MMA, as a result of that, they really grew as a result as well. And some of the guys who were doing stuff for them, their profile's gone up, and they've done really well as a result as well. So if you can get relationships with people on the way up, when they get to the top, assuming that they're decent guys, they'll remember you when they see you. So that's the other thing as well. And that also gives you live event experience, albeit at a lower level, so that when you do build things up, or you're in a position to get on a credentialed show that's much bigger, you're not completely alien to it, and you know how it all works. But yeah, I hope that makes some sort of sense, Sandhu. I started rambling towards the end there, but yeah, I hope that's useful info.
And that was the final question, short and sweet this week. But I hope people found, especially that last question, valuable. And you're right, Simon. I've been hit up on email plenty of times. I'm sure you have too, from younger aspiring reporters asking for advice, and I'm always happy to take 5-10 minutes out, hit a reply, and hopefully give them some advice that's going to help them in the long term.
Absolutely. I mean, my Twitter DMs are open, So if anyone wants to DM me any questions, please feel free to do so, and I'll always try and get back to you. Might not be instant, but I will always try and get back to you. Because, you know, as the phrase goes, was it a rising tide lifts all ships? And it's Sandhu, that's how it works. Everyone,
that's right.
You know, there are some people who will like to, you know, they like to plough their own furrow and sort of screw people over. That's not really how either the pair of us see things. We tend to look at things slightly differently. So anyone needs any advice, feel free to hit me up on DM on Twitter at SimonHead with any questions, and I'll do my best to give you some sort of useful answer. And if I can't, I'll tell you I can't. So it's all good. Don't ask me for any cooking tips, for example, because I'm terrible. Right, final part of the show. This was going to be a short show, but yet again, it's gone on again. It's gone on a bit. I'll blame Gegard Mousasi. UFC Glasgow takes place this Sunday night. It's a Sunday night show. Good luck on Monday morning, everybody. It's a Sunday night show at the SSE Hydro, one of my favourite venues in Europe. Amazing venue. The UFC are back in Scotland for UFC Fight Night 113. Gunnar Nelson against Santiago Ponzinibbio. It is a fight card catered very much to UFC Fight Pass or Fox Sports, and it's catered very much to the local market. So we're not blessed with an enormous amount of A-list stars, but if you're a fan of domestic level MMA and have seen some of our fighters rise up through the ranks to reach the UFC, then there will be some names on here that you'll be happy to watch. Brett Johns is in action on the Fight Pass prelims. Undefeated bantamweight former Cage Warriors world champion. He's in action. We've got Danny Roberts, who had that absolute war with Mike Perry in was it Manchester? It was Manchester last year, wasn't it? Unbelievable fight that was. He's back in action on the televised prelims. And then on the main card, we've got Paul Craig in action on home soil against Khalil Roundtree. Jack Marshman, who is never in a bad fight, against Ryan James. That's a sleeper fight of the night, by the way. Stevie Ray Paul Felder is the odds-on for fight of the night. Joe Calderwood versus Cynthia Calvillo. And then Nelson versus Ponzinibbio. Sandhu, give me your top three. What three fights are you most intrigued, excited, eager to take in next Sunday? You're going to be up there covering Fight Week for MMA Junkie. Who are the people you're most looking forward to talking to, and which fights are you most looking forward to seeing live?
Well, starting from the bottom up, maybe a little bit different to you, Simon. But Danny Roberts. Now, we were both cage side for his last outing in Manchester. And it was a war against Mike Perry. Mike Perry, man, he put a beating on Danny Roberts. And it's been, around 8 months since that fight, last October. And I'm just interested to see, you know, how he rebounds, because that was a beating that he took from Mike Perry. And, you know, it was one of those ones where we were both really kind of like egging the referee to jump in and stop it, because you could see that Roberts was out on his feet for the latter part of that third round, and probably took a little bit more punishment than he should have, really. But that just shows what a true warrior he really is, to keep on his feet and to try and survive. But yeah, so anyway, back to the point. I'm really kind of curious to see what he's done since then to improve his game. And how he rebounds against Bobby Nash. Super excited to see Joanne Calderwood versus Cynthia Calvillo. I think everyone kind of universally recognizes Cynthia Calvillo as the unofficial Diaz sister. She's just got that spunk and attitude and personality about her. Ever since she made her debut for the UFC against Amanda Cooper in March, and then followed that up with another great win against Pearl Gonzalez. It's relatively early for her in her pro career. She's a 5-0 fighter, but she's already showing both the fans, the media, and more importantly, Dana White, that she's got the right attitude and she's got an amazing fighting style. And I think she's going to be a threat in the long term in that women's strawweight division. Now, interestingly enough, for Joanne Calderwood, this will probably be the last time we see her fight at this weight class, because the UFC is introducing the flyweight division. And unfortunately for her, they had just booked this fight literally, I think it was a couple of days or maybe a week or two tops until they kind of announced that the UFC flyweight division was coming around the corner. So it'll be interesting to kind of speak to her, get her take on things. And then, of course, you've got Stevie Ray versus Paul Felder. I think that's going to be a barn burner of a fight. We've spent some time with Paul Felder here on the European circuit, and you got Stevie Ray coming off 2 important wins for him against Ross Pearson and Joe Lazon back to back. And I think this is going to be a good test for him against Paul Felder. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong here because I'll need to double check this, but having a look at some of his interviews on social media, I think Stevie Ray is playing out his contract with this Paul Felder fight, or is very close to ending his current UFC contract to see if he can get a better deal. So that'll add the stakes. I want to question about that actually, because I'm pretty sure I've seen that recently in some of his social media posts. Obviously, I haven't mentioned the main event, and it kind of goes back to some of the points you were making at the start of the segment, Simon, where here in Europe, we're starting to see perhaps not your super A-list fighters be put into a position. Now, don't get me wrong. I like the fight, Gunnar Nelson, Santiago Ponzinibbio. Would I like to see Nelson perhaps fight somebody in and around where he's ranked, or maybe just ahead of him? Yes. But he's the one that's decided to accept this fight. It's close to home. It's a short flight over for him to Glasgow. I'm sure he's the betting favourite. I expect him to win quite comfortably, in my opinion. But it was a bit of a strange choice, so to speak, to put, Nelson and Ponzinibbio in a main event of a Glasgow show where the Scottish fans are going to come out in droves and be super, super passionate. I think that fan base and that market deserved something a little bit more marquee value, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think I can agree with that. I think Ponzinibbio is one of those fighters who he's good. He's really good. I mean, he's an all-action fighter. He's exciting to watch. He comes forward. I think he's tailor-made for Gunnar Nelson, though. I think he's absolutely tailor-made for Gunnar Nelson. And I think the way the timing of this works, if Gunnar Nelson gets through this one unscathed, then that means he should be nicely set for Madison Square Garden in November. Because you can bet if Conor McGregor is going to come back on that card, then you would think that Gunnar Nelson might well be on there with him. So that's another thing to bear in mind as well. Fights I'm most looking forward to, other than the ones you mentioned, Jack Marshman, Ryan James. Ryan James is sort of a big, solid, come forward sort of fighter. Jack Marshman loves nothing better than to just walk forward and exchange punches. I think that will be a good, fun fight. I wouldn't expect too many submission attempts in that fight. I think you watch it finish by submission. Now I've said that, but I think that one could degenerate into a slugfest pretty quickly. We've got James Mulheron making his UFC debut against Justin Willis. That's one to look out for. British heavyweight. Danny Roberts. I'm interested to see how Danny Roberts goes. Neil Seery is in action, and we haven't mentioned Neil Seery. This should be his retirement fight. He's fighting Alexandra Pantoja, who I know very, very little about. But I do know a lot about Neil Seery. And, as someone who's covered a few of his fights, and, we've both been there and watched some of his fights. We were both there in Belfast when his fight with Ian McCall fell through on weigh-in day. He was absolutely crestfallen. So hopefully nothing happens in the lead up to that fight and he gets to get in the octagon and go out on his own terms on Fight Night. Danny Henry, Scottish prospect who is a EFC champion down in South Africa. He's joined the UFC and he's taking on Daniel Tamer, brother of David Tamer. And from the reports I've heard, he's even more of a nutcase than David Tamer. So I can't see that being anything other than entertaining as well. And Brett Johns, I enjoy watching Brett Johns as well. And finally, first fight of the night, Leslie Smith. There are a few people in the active roster of the UFC who are more vocal in campaigning for improved fighter rights than Leslie Smith. And she also happens to be an absolute warrior when she gets in the cage as well. So she's first fight on against Amanda Lemos. So there's some good interesting fights on that card. Perhaps haven't got the Stardust there. Could have done with just a little bit of sprinkling of Stardust on the top of the card. But I think we'll see some good fights on Sunday night. That'll be live on BT Sport, and it'll be live at a sensible time, which, given it's on a Sunday night, is probably for the best. You can imagine a few sore heads north of the border going into work on Monday morning. But that's UFC Glasgow, and that all pretty much wraps us up. The only other thing to mention, of course, Sandhu, is we've got certain Mayweather versus McGregor press conference taking place this Friday, SSE Arena at Wembley. Tickets, if you listen to this, if you're one of the early adopters of this show, people who want to tune in or get the show as early as possible after we release it, you might just have enough time to get your tickets. They go on sale, they're available to get online via the SSE Arena website, Tuesday, midday. Make sure you get them quick because they will go very, very quickly. Sandhu, you're going to be there. What are your thoughts, and what are you expecting? Dana White's already said it's going to be a shit show. What do you think it's going to be?
Well, I hope I'm going to be there. I hope we're both going to be there. I think we're both expecting approvals of our media credential applications to come through in the next 24 hours or so, as of this recording. But yeah, I'd like to think that we'll both get our credentials approved. It's always a bit of a new system because we're kind of technically applying through Showtime Boxing and Showtime Sports, who we don't really have a long-standing reputation or rapport with, but they are partnering with the UFC, and hopefully the UFC PR team know who the folks are based in London from the MMA side of things that they'd want to have there to cover the event. But yeah, so hopefully it will be there. I don't know what to expect. I guess I'm going to expect what we normally get out of a Conor McGregor press conference, which is lots of good quotes, lots of entertainment, lots of fun. This whole week will be interesting to follow, actually, both from LA to Toronto and New York, and then obviously the final pit stop. Save the best to last, Simon. That's what I would say. Save the best to last with the London show on Friday, and they're calling it a show. If when I got the press release, they kind of said the doors open at 5 p.m. at the SSE Arena in Wembley, and then the show starts at 7 o'clock, which is interesting. So we'll see what's available. Actually, as we're speaking, it looks like our good friend Ariel Helwani of MMAfighting.com, he's going to be hosting alongside Brendan Schaub and Paul Malignaggi, and they're going to serve as analysts for LA, New York, and Toronto, which is an interesting move by Showtime to get them on board. Mauro Ranallo will also be in LA as a host. So that'll be interesting. So, I mean, if that's LA, New York, and Toronto, interesting to see.
Who are we going to get then?
Who are we going to get? I mean, I certainly haven't had the call, Simon. I don't know about you.
No.
So, yeah, interesting. And I think these are the bits and pieces that will add the bells and whistles to the fans. I mean, it's for free. You're going to want to get everyone's hot take on, what will transpire. I'm looking forward to the atmosphere. This is the one opportunity that I think a lot of the Irish will, get. Obviously, it's a bit of a bummer that Dublin didn't get on the list as a host city for this world tour. So I'm expecting lots of Irish to fly down to London for the day. They'll probably make a weekend out of it and probably stay for the weekend. It's nice weather at the moment. It's summertime here in London. You're going to have tons of Irish that are based here in London that are going to want to see it. Plus, you're going to have just hardcore fans. But you know what I'm looking forward to most, Simon? It's going to be the mixture of boxing media, MMA media, boxing fans and MMA fans. And this is going to give us one opportunity, and maybe, in some respects, the only opportunity to see how we all get along, or maybe we don't get along at all. Who knows? So yeah, it'll be a lot of firsts, and I can't wait to kind of look back and reflect on it on next week's show.
I think the key word here is the dynamic, and wherever you turn and wherever you look, whether you look in the crowd, whether you look within the press section, when you look on the stage, the dynamic, the clash of cultures, the clash of personalities is going to be fascinating to see. The thing for me is going to be how Floyd Mayweather reacts to Conor McGregor as the press dates go along. And I just hope that Floyd doesn't bail before the end of the press tour so that the London event actually does go ahead. Because if Conor's completely peed him off, by the time they've left by the time they've left Brooklyn, Floyd might say, you know what, I'm binning off the transatlantic flight. I'm going back to Vegas. So let's hope that doesn't happen. But we saw what McGregor did to Jose Aldo over the course of a global press tour. He mentally messed the guy up. I'm really looking forward to seeing just what kind of verbal ammunition McGregor's going to come with, because let's be honest, look at Floyd Mayweather's past. He's got some previous, and if Conor wants to go down that route, then it could get a little bit nasty. So, Mayweather's got a slightly murky past, some of the things that he's been prosecuted for. So we will see what comes of that, if anything. I almost wonder whether McGregor has had to sign some sort of non-disparaging statement, something in the contract that says he isn't going to go down that route, the whole domestic violence route and stuff like that, because there's not really anywhere that Floyd can go if Conor starts bringing that up in the middle of a huge crowd of fans, especially if he starts doing it in London. Because Floyd is a big boxing star. He's got a great record, but as a human being, he isn't the most popular guy in the world for some of the stuff he's done. So, and the one thing with Conor, he might be brash, he might be, a little bit gobby at times, but outside of fighting, there doesn't really seem to be a hell of a lot that you can really stick on him. So, I'm really looking forward to seeing just what McGregor's going to come up with, because him just walking around saying, I'm going to shock the world, isn't going to work over 4 press conference events. And you know that he's preparing stuff. You know that he's got stuff ready, and we know that when he sits down, he's gonna know what he's gonna come with. And the thing I'm going to be really fascinated to see is how Mayweather reacts to it. I think his dad is going to play a big role in these press conferences. Floyd Senior will be the one. He'll be the one mouthing off. It won't be Floyd, because that's not really Floyd's style. All Floyd does is tells you how rich he is and tells you how many fights he's won. That's pretty much it. Floyd Senior, he'll be the one with the trash talk. So that, I think, is where the real clash will happen, and I can't wait to see it. I have no idea whether we're going to get any of it on TV over here, or if is any of it going to be live streamed. I don't know. Hopefully, it's going to be good fun to watch. And as I said, I went on TalkSport a couple of weeks ago, and I said the press conferences should be pay-per-view and the fight should be free. Because the press conferences, I think, are going to be, they'll be longer, more drawn out, and there'll be more entertainment in those press conferences, potentially, than the actual fight, which could become a bit of a damp squib. But we will see. It's going to be good fun to find out. So, Maymac, the press tour starts this week. By the time you listen to this, they'll probably be setting themselves up in Los Angeles for the first one. That, I think, wraps us up, Sandhu.
It does. A packed show this week, but there's not really anything that we could have skipped and put by the wayside. It was just one of them weekends or one of them weeks. So apologies for the legs, but I hope you guys all enjoyed the show.
Yeah, breaking news during the pod. That's a bit of a rarity as well. Gegard Mousasi joining Bellator and MMA. Good get by Scott Coker. That pretty much wraps us up then. So let's do all the family business and get the hell out of here. You can follow Sandhu at Sandhu MMA. You can follow me at Simon Head. You can follow the show at the Brit Pack MMA. The website is thebritpackmma.com. We're on SoundCloud, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Stitcher, and we're also on Acast. I'm investigating a few other bits and pieces as well, so we may be available on 1 or 2 other platforms further down the line in the future. Stay tuned for news on that. Other than that, all that remains is to say thank you so much for listening to the show. That was episode number 46. Enjoy the fights, whether you're going to Glasgow or whether you're watching it on the TV. We'll speak to you next time.